Eli Boone hadn't drawn his gun in 15 years, not until the bullet meant for him struck his boy in the chest. Now the legend they called a coward is strapping on his iron again, and this time he's not waiting for the first shot. Eli Boone, the name used to echo through saloons and dusty streets, a whisper of fear and respect. He was a legend, they said, the fastest draw in 3 states. No one dared challenge him, and those who did, well, they ended up buried with their boots on. But that was a long time ago, before the war, before the blood soaked the land, before the small wooden cross marked Mary's final resting place. The war changed him. Mary's death broke him. He couldn't stomach the gun anymore. He'd traded his Colt Peacemaker for a plow, his dusty duster for a worn-out work shirt. He settled in the quiet town of Redemption, hoping to find just that, redemption. He raised his son Caleb, teaching him to fish, to read, to be a good man. He wanted Caleb to know a world without the iron taste of gunpowder and the hollow ache of loss. The townsfolk mostly left him alone, respecting the quiet strength he carried, a shadow of the legend he once was. They knew better than to poke a sleeping bear. Eli Boone was a ghost of his former self, but a ghost that still commanded respect. He was a living reminder of a past they preferred to forget. Life in Redemption wasn't easy, but it was good. Eli's small ranch was nestled in a valley, far enough from town to offer peace, but close enough for supplies. He taught Caleb how to mend fences, plant corn, and care for their small herd of cattle. Evenings were spent reading aloud by the warm glow of the fireplace, the stories filling their small home with laughter and adventure. Caleb was the light of Eli's life, a reminder of the love he had shared with Mary. He saw her eyes in Caleb's bright smile, her spirit in his unwavering kindness. Eli tried to shield him from the darkness that still lingered in his own heart, the memories that haunted his sleep. He told Caleb stories of heroes and good men, carefully omitting the tales of gunfights and bloodshed that had once defined his existence. He wanted Caleb to be better than him, kinder, gentler, and free from the burden of violence. Eli poured all his love and energy into raising Caleb, hoping to create a future where his son would never have to know the horrors he had witnessed. He was determined to build a life of peace and happiness, a legacy far removed from the legend of Eli Boone, the gunslinger. The peace of redemption was shattered one sweltering afternoon. A dust cloud billowed on the horizon, growing larger as it approached the town. It heralded the arrival of Jedediah Jade Stone, a young outlaw with a reputation as loud as his gun was shiny. He swaggered into the saloon, spurs jingling, a sneer plastered across his face. Jade was looking to make a name for himself, and he figured taking down a legend was the quickest way to do it. He'd heard the stories about Eli Boone, the gunslinger who'd vanished. He'd even heard whispers that Boone was living right here in Redemption. "I'm looking for Eli Boone," Jade announced, his voice cutting through the saloon's murmur. "Heard he was the fastest gun in the West. I'm here to prove that ain't true no more." He slammed his fist on the bar, scattering cards and sending drinks sloshing. The saloon went silent. Everyone knew where Eli lived. Everyone knew what Jade was trying to do. They just hoped Eli wouldn't take the bait. They knew what would happen if the sleeping bear was truly awakened. News traveled fast in a small town. Eli heard about Jade Stone before he even reached his ranch. He sighed, a weariness settling over him. He'd hoped this day would never come. He'd buried the past, or so he thought. Jade arrived at the ranch just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Caleb was outside, tending to the chickens. Eli stepped onto the porch, his face etched with a quiet resolve. "Stone," Eli said, his voice low but firm, "I know why you're here." Jade smirked, dismounting his horse. "You gonna make this easy, old man, or am I gonna have to drag you out?" Eli shook his head. "I'm not going to fight you, Stone. I gave up that life a long time ago. There's nothing here for you." He gestured towards Caleb, who was watching the scene with wide, frightened eyes. "Just leave us be." He wouldn't let this man ruin the life he had built, the peace he had fought so hard to achieve. He wouldn't let the legend of Eli Boone destroy his son's future. Jade Stone didn't care about peace. He didn't care about families or legacies. He only cared about making a name for himself. Eli's refusal was an insult, a challenge to his own bravado. "You think I'm just gonna walk away?" Jade sneered, his hand hovering over his gun. "You think I'm afraid of an old man?" Eli stood his ground, his eyes fixed on Jade. "I'm not afraid of you, Stone. I just have nothing to prove." Jade laughed a harsh, grating sound. We'll see about that. In a flash, he drew his gun. Eli didn't move. He wouldn't draw. He wouldn't become that man again. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. The gunshot echoed through the valley, but the pain never came. Instead, he heard a sharp cry, a sound that ripped through his soul. He opened his eyes to see Caleb collapsing to the ground, a crimson stain blooming on his shirt. Jade's bullet had missed its intended target. It had found its mark in the one person Eli loved most in the world. The world seemed to tilt. A roar built in Eli's ears, drowning out everything but the sight of his son bleeding on the dusty ground. Time seemed to stop. Eli knelt beside Caleb, his hands trembling as he pressed them against the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. Caleb's face was pale, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. "Papa," he whispered, his voice weak. Eli's heart shattered. "I'm here, son, I'm here." He looked up at Jade, who was still standing there, a look of surprise on his face. But it wasn't remorse, it was more like annoyance. Something inside Eli snapped. The years of peace, the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart, crumbled. The legend of Eli Boone, the gunslinger, was no longer a ghost. It was a living, breathing entity, fueled by grief and rage. He looked at Jade, and the outlaw saw something flicker in Eli's eyes, something cold, something deadly. It wasn't just anger, it was a promise of pain, a promise of retribution. A promise that Jade Stone had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had awakened a sleeping giant, and now he would pay the price. The price was going to be steeper than Jade could ever imagine. Jade, sensing the shift in Eli, hesitated for only a moment before scrambling back onto his horse and spurring it into a gallop, fleeing the ranch as fast as he could. He knew he'd made a mistake, but he didn't yet understand the magnitude of it. Eli watched him go, his face a mask of grim determination. He gently lifted Caleb and carried him inside, laying him on his bed. He needed to get to Doc Miller, but he knew he had to prepare first. He moved with a deliberate purpose, each action precise and calculated. He retrieved a worn leather belt from the back of his closet. The holster, stiff with disuse, felt foreign in his hand. He strapped it around his waist, the weight familiar and unsettling. Then he reached for the duster hanging in the corner, the canvas thick with dust. He shrugged it on, the fabric settling over his shoulders like a shroud. He walked to the old wooden chest beneath the window. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, lay his Colt Peacemaker. He picked it up, the cold steel a shock to his skin. He checked the cylinder, each chamber loaded. The gun felt like an extension of his own hand. Eli Boone was back. And he was coming for Jade Stone. Redemption was about to get a whole lot bloodier. After ensuring Caleb was as comfortable as possible, Eli rode into redemption. The townsfolk watched him pass, a silent understanding in their eyes. They knew what was coming. They saw the duster, the gun belt, the grim set of his jaw. The peaceful farmer was gone, replaced by the ghost of Eli Boone, the gunslinger. He stopped at Doc Miller's, his face etched with worry. "Doc, you need to help him." Doc Miller, a kind, weathered man, nodded solemnly. "I'll do everything I can, Eli." Eli knew Doc was a good man, but he also knew Caleb's chances were slim. Jade Stone's bullet had done more than wound his son. It had ripped a hole in Eli's soul. He left Doc's office and walked to the livery. He needed a horse, a fast one. He saddled up a black stallion, its eyes gleaming with wild energy, a perfect match for the storm raging inside him. As he rode out of town, heading in the direction Jade had fled, a cold wind seemed to rise, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of vengeance. The hunt had begun, and Eli Boone was the hunter. The wind whipped at Eli's duster as he rode, the black stallion eating up the miles. His mind was a whirlwind of memories, Mary's laughter, Caleb's first steps, the feel of his son's small hand in his. And then the image of Caleb lying on the ground, bleeding. He pushed the memories aside, focusing on the task at hand. He was a tracker now, a hunter. He scanned the ground, searching for signs, a broken twig, a disturbed patch of dirt, anything that would lead him to Jade Stone. He remembered a time long ago when tracking men was second nature to him. He could read the land like a book, anticipate his prey's every move. He'd learned those skills in the war, skills that had kept him alive when so many others had fallen. Skills he'd tried to bury, but that now resurfaced with chilling ease. He found Jade's trail easily enough. The outlaw wasn't trying to hide, too confident in his escape, too ignorant to understand the force that was now pursuing him. Eli followed the tracks, his face grim, his heart filled with a cold, unwavering purpose. He would find Jade Stone, and he would make him pay. The battlefield was a muddy hellscape, filled with the screams of dying men and the acrid stench of gunpowder. Eli, barely a boy himself, moved through the chaos with a chilling calm. He was a natural. He didn't flinch at the sight of blood, didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. He remembered one particular skirmish. A group of enemy soldiers had ambushed his unit, trapping them in a narrow ravine. Panic spread like wildfire, but Eli remained focused. He found a high vantage point, a rocky outcrop overlooking the ravine. He took aim, his movements precise and economical. One shot, one kill, another shot, another soldier down. He moved with a speed and accuracy that defied belief, his Colt spitting lead with deadly efficiency. Within minutes, the ambush was broken. The remaining enemy soldiers scattered, fleeing in terror. Eli had single-handedly saved his unit. His captain had approached him, his face a mixture of awe and unease. "You're a natural killer, Boone," he'd said. "Don't ever forget that." Eli hadn't forgotten. He tried to, but he couldn't. The skill, the ruthlessness, it was a part of him, woven into the very fabric of his being. Meanwhile, Jade Stone, oblivious to the storm gathering behind him, continued his reckless spree. He robbed a stagecoach, terrorizing the passengers and making off with a small fortune. He swaggered into another town, boasting about his encounter with Eli Boone, embellishing the story to make himself seem even more heroic. "That old man didn't stand a chance," he'd bragged to a group of wide-eyed onlookers. "I showed him what's what. He's probably lying in his grave right now." He was building his reputation, solidifying his image as a fearless outlaw. He attracted a small gang of like-minded thugs, eager to share in his ill-gotten gains and bask in his newfound notoriety. They rode with him, laughing and drinking, convinced that they were invincible. They didn't know who Eli Boone really was. They didn't understand the kind of fury they had unleashed. They thought they were riding with a hero. They were riding with a dead man. Jade's arrogance was his downfall, blinding him to the true danger that was rapidly approaching. He was too busy celebrating his supposed victory to notice the darkness closing in. Eli followed Jade's trail, a shadow moving through the land. He stopped at each town Jade had visited, asking questions, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't threaten, he didn't intimidate, he simply asked, but his presence was enough. People recognized the name Eli Boone, the name that still carried weight, still inspired fear. They saw the duster, the gun, the haunted look in his eyes. They knew he wasn't asking for information, he was collecting it, and they gave it to him willingly. They told him everything they knew about Jade Stone, his gang, his plans. They whispered about the stagecoach robbery, the boasts, the lies. They were eager to help Eli, to be on the right side of what was coming. As Eli moved on, he left a trail of fear and whispers in his wake. The legend of Eli Boone was spreading once more, growing larger with each passing day. People spoke of him in hushed tones, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and anticipation. They knew that a reckoning was coming, and they could only hope to be far away when it arrived. The storm was gathering pace. Jade Stone was about to face the whirlwind. Eli learned that Jade and his gang were holed up in an abandoned mining town called Dust Devil Gulch. It was a lawless place, a haven for outlaws and desperados. The perfect place for Jade to hide, or so he thought. As Eli approached Dust Devil Gulch, he could feel the tension in the air. The wind seemed to carry the scent of fear, the silence broken only by the creaking of rusted metal and the distant caw of a crow. He dismounted his stallion, leaving him tethered to a scrubby bush. He would face this on foot. He moved slowly, deliberately, his senses on high alert. He could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and drunken boasting coming from the saloon. He knew Jade was inside. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He wasn't the peaceful farmer anymore. He was Eli Boone, the gunslinger, and he was about to deliver justice to Dust Devil Gulch. The final confrontation was imminent, the air thick with anticipation. A storm was about to break, and Dust Devil Gulch would never be the same. Inside the saloon, Jade and his gang were celebrating their recent successes. They were drunk, loud, and full of themselves. They believed they were untouchable. "Heard that old man Boone is still alive," one of the gang members slurred, raising his glass. "Probably crying in his beer after you showed him who's boss, Jade." Jade laughed, pounding his fist on the table. "That old coot is nothing. I could take him with one hand tied behind my back." They all laughed, bolstering each other's egos. They had heard whispers about Eli Boone, the legend, but they dismissed them as old wives' tales, stories meant to scare children. They thought Jade had already dealt with him. They checked their guns, sharpened their knives, and prepared for a fight just in case. But they weren't worried. They outnumbered Eli. They were young, strong, and fearless. They had nothing to lose. They had no idea what they were up against. They didn't understand that they weren't facing just a man. They were facing a legend, a force of nature, a whirlwind of vengeance. They were about to learn a very hard lesson, a lesson that would cost them everything. The Outlaws gang is ready, but they have no idea about the true danger they are about to face. Eli kicked open the saloon doors, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. All eyes turned to him. Jade and his gang froze, their bravado evaporating like morning mist. Eli stood in the doorway, a figure of grim authority. His duster billowed around him, his face etched with a cold fury. His eyes, dark and unwavering, scanned the room, settling on Jade. "Stone," Eli said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's time to pay for what you've done." The gang members scrambled for their guns, but Eli was faster. He moved with a speed that defied their drunken perceptions. His Colt peacemaker barked, spitting lead with deadly accuracy. One by one the gang members fell, their boasts turning into choked gasps. Eli moved through the saloon like a whirlwind, a force of nature unleashed. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't wild. He was controlled, precise, deadly. He wasn't enjoying this. He didn't want to kill, but he knew exactly how. He was a man driven by grief and a thirst for justice, and he wouldn't stop until Jade Stone was brought to account. The saloon became a scene of carnage. Eli was a hurricane of fury. Jade watched in horror as his gang was decimated, their bodies crumpling to the floor like rag dolls. He had never seen anything like it. He had heard the stories about Eli Boone, but he had dismissed them as exaggerations, tall tales meant to frighten greenhorns. Now he was witnessing the legend firsthand. He saw the speed, the precision, the cold, unwavering focus in Eli's eyes. He realized that he wasn't facing just a man. He was facing a force of nature, an unstoppable engine of destruction. Fear gripped him, paralyzing him. He tried to raise his gun, but his hand trembled so violently that he couldn't get a steady aim. He understood, finally, the terror he had unleashed. He had poked a sleeping bear, and now the bear was awake and hungry for vengeance. He had wanted to make a name for himself. He had wanted to become a legend. But now he realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had challenged the wrong man. He had signed his own death warrant. Eli's reputation is well earned. Eli slowly advanced towards Jade, his Colt still smoking. The saloon was silent except for the soft thud of bodies hitting the floor. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Jade stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror. He knew he was outmatched. He knew he was going to die. "Why?" Jade stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Eli stopped a few feet away from him, his gaze unwavering. "You hurt my son," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "That's all you need to know." He raised his Colt, aiming it at Jade's chest. Jade closed his eyes, bracing for the impact, but the shot never came. Instead, Eli lowered his gun slightly, aiming for Jade's leg. He fired. Jade screamed, clutching his wounded leg. He collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. Eli holstered his gun. He wasn't going to kill Jade, not here, not now. Death was too easy. He wanted Jade to suffer, to live with the consequences of his actions. He wanted him to understand the pain he had inflicted on Caleb. A clash of past and present has led to this showdown. Eli turned and walked out of the saloon, leaving Jade to wallow in his pain and regret. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His actions spoke volumes. He mounted his stallion and rode out of Dust Devil Gulch, leaving behind a scene of carnage and a legend reborn. He had delivered justice, not with blind rage, but with cold, calculated precision. He had shown Jade Stone the true meaning of pain. He knew that Jade would likely be arrested, tried, and imprisoned. But even if he wasn't, Eli knew that Jade's life was effectively over. He would be forever haunted by the memory of Eli Boone, the gunslinger who had spared his life but taken everything else. Eli had defeated the outlaw not by killing him but by breaking him. He had chosen justice over vengeance, a path that was far more difficult but ultimately more satisfying. He had proven that there was something more dangerous than a man who wanted to kill. There was a man who knew exactly how. He served his justice. The ride back to redemption was long and arduous. Eli was exhausted both physically and emotionally. The weight of the duster felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the violence he had embraced once more. He arrived in Redemption just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. He rode straight to Doc Miller's office, his heart pounding with anticipation. He found Doc tending to Caleb, who was pale but awake. Caleb looked up at Eli, a weak smile gracing his lips. "Papa," he whispered. Eli rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "How are you feeling, son?" "Better," Caleb said, his voice still weak. "Doc says I'm gonna be okay." Eli's heart swelled with relief. He had avenged his son, but more importantly, he was going to be all right. He had returned to the violence of his past, but he had also protected the future he had built. Eli has returned, but has been changed forever. He's glad his son will be okay. A few days later, Eli stood in the small cemetery overlooking Redemption. He stood before Mary's grave, the weathered wooden cross a silent testament to his loss. The duster was gone, replaced by his worn-out work shirt. The gun belt was back in the chest, hopefully for good this time. He looked down at the inscription on the cross, Mary Boone, a loving wife and mother. He felt a pang of guilt, a reminder of the promise he had made to her, a promise to leave the violence behind. He had broken that promise, but he had done it to protect their son. He closed his eyes, offering a silent prayer, a plea for forgiveness. He knew she would understand. He opened his eyes and looked out over the valley, the sun shining brightly on the town below. He saw Caleb fishing in the creek, his laughter carried on the gentle breeze. A mix of grief and resolve filled his eyes. He would never forget the violence he had embraced, the darkness he had faced. But he would also never forget the love he had found, the peace he had cherished. He would carry both with him forever. He is going to protect what is most important. He turned and walked back towards his ranch, towards his son, towards the future. The legend of Eli Boone may have been reborn, but it was the love of a father that would guide him now. The end.